He was not a warrior. He had never won a battle. But on a foggy morning in 1600, Ishida Mitsunari raised the largest army Japan had ever seen against the most powerful man alive. He lost in 6 hours. Why did the most brilliant administrator of his age choose this? And what did he know that history took centuries to understand? He was a bureaucrat, not a warrior. He lost Japan's most decisive battle in 6 hours. And when they captured him, he was smiling. Who was Ishida Mitsunari? Ishida Mitsunari was born in 1560 in Omi Province, present-day Shiga Prefecture, the son of a minor samurai family. His path to power began with a cup of tea. According to the famous story, the young Mitsunari, around 13 years old, serving at a temple, brought tea to the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi when he stopped to rest. He served it in 3 rounds. The first cup, large and cool enough to drink quickly. The second, smaller and warmer. The third, small and hot. Hideyoshi was astonished. No servant had ever served tea with such studied care for the guest's needs. Hideyoshi immediately took Mitsunari into his service. What followed was a meteoric rise built on a single quality. Mitsunari's administrative genius was without equal in Japan. He could coordinate the logistics of armies, manage complex taxation systems, organize census records, and plan supply chains for campaigns across the Korean Straits, all with the precision of a man who experienced the world as a system to be optimized. By his 30s, he was one of the Go-Bumyo, the 5 magistrates who administered Hideyoshi's realm. But Mitsunari had a problem. He was brilliant, and he could not hide that he knew it. He held other generals to the same standard of precision he held himself, and they reliably failed. He criticized Fukushima Masanori's battlefield decisions. He reported Kuroda Nagamasa's misconduct to Hideyoshi. He calculated outcomes coldly, where other men reacted from pride. The samurai commanders who fought Hideyoshi's wars despised him. They called him a pen pusher, a schemer, a man who had never held a spear. They were not entirely wrong. Then, in August 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died. He was 62 years old. On his deathbed, he entrusted his young son, Toyotomi Hideyori, 5 years old, to the care of 5 regents, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. Hideyoshi's last words were said to be a plea to Ieyasu to care for his son. Mitsunari heard those words. He had built his entire identity on serving Hideyoshi faithfully. The man was dead. The son remained. And Ieyasu was already moving. Ieyasu began violating Hideyoshi's dying instructions almost immediately. He formed marriage alliances without the council's approval, technically forbidden. He received daimyo in private audiences, building personal loyalties. He positioned his allies in strategic domains. Mitsunari watched every move and documented each violation. He reported them to the council. The council did nothing. Ieyasu was too powerful, too careful, too liked. And Mitsunari, brilliant, cold, precise Mitsunari, was none of those things.
In 1600, Ieyasu marched east to punish a rebellious daimyo, leaving the West politically exposed. Mitsunari saw his moment. He spent weeks in furious correspondence, calling in favors, making promises, invoking Hideyoshi's memory. He assembled a coalition of daimyo who feared Ieyasu's growing dominance and who remembered their loyalty to the Toyotomi house. The Western army numbered over 100,000 men. Military men who had never respected Mitsunari now rode under his banner, not because they liked him, but because they had made the same calculation he had.
But from the beginning, the Western army had a structural problem. Its commanders did not respect their leader. Mitsunari had never commanded a large force in the field. Shimazu Yoshihiro, one of Japan's most fearsome warriors, was technically under his command and found it insulting. Ukita Hideye contributed forces, but had his own agenda. Kobayakawa Hideaki, whose loyalty would prove critical, was already in contact with Ieyasu. Mitsunari had assembled an army built on a foundation of distrust, old grievances, and calculated self-interest. He probably knew it.
October 20th, 1600. The night before battle. Mitsunari walked the Western Army's positions in the fog and rain around the village of Sekigahara. He had done everything a man could do. He had written hundreds of letters. He had coordinated dozens of lords. He had positioned his forces with textbook precision on the high ground. Ieyasu's eastern army was below them in the valley. On paper, the West had more men. On paper, the position was favorable. Mitsunari had read every variable he could reach. He could not read the ones he couldn't. At 8 in the morning, on October 21, 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara began. For the first hours, it was genuinely close. The Western Army's superior position gave them advantages Mitsunari had calculated correctly. Then, at around 2 in the afternoon, Kobayakawa Hideaki, whose forces held the decisive high ground on the western flank, received a signal shot from Ieyasu. He switched sides. 15,000 men crashed into the Western Army's flank. In minutes, the coalition collapsed. What Mitsunari could not calculate was that the man he needed most had already been bought. The Battle of Sekigahara lasted less than 6 hours. It had taken Mitsunari years to build. He fled into the mountains of Omi, his home province, pursued by Ieyasu's forces. He was found 3 days later, hiding in a farmer's barn, cold, exhausted, feverish. The man who had administered half of Japan, coordinated 2 invasions of Korea, and raised the largest army of the era, was captured by farmers who recognized him. He was brought to Ieyasu in chains. In the days before his execution, several things happened that became legend. When offered persimmons, considered harmful to the sick, Mitsunari declined, saying he needed his health for the execution, not for the persimmon. When a guard mocked him, saying the Toyotomi cause was finished and his loyalty pointless, Mitsunari replied, "The greatest loyalty is to serve faithfully, even when the cause is lost." What would you know of that? He was executed in Kyoto on November 6th, 1600, at the age of 40. The accounts say he faced it without flinching. Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogun in 1603 and established the dynasty that would rule Japan for 265 years. The Toyotomi house survived another 15 years until Ieyasu destroyed it at the siege of Osaka in 1615. Young Hideyoshi, the boy Mitsunari had given everything to protect, died in that siege at age 23. The cause for which Mitsunari had sacrificed his life was ultimately lost in full. Ieyasu had won every possible victory. Mitsunari had been correct that the Tokugawa meant to take everything. He had simply been unable to stop it. Japan has remembered Ishida Mitsunari in complicated ways. For centuries, the Tokugawa narrative cast him as a scheming villain, the man who had disrupted peace for personal ambition. But modern Japanese scholarship has reassessed him significantly. His administrative records survive and are remarkable. His correspondence shows a man genuinely committed to Hideyoshi's legacy and to the Toyotomi cause. The question historians now ask is not whether Mitsunari was loyal. The evidence is overwhelming that he was. But whether loyalty itself can be a tragic flaw.
Here is what makes Mitsunari's story genuinely difficult. He was probably right about Ieyasu. Every violation of Hideyoshi's final instructions that Mitsunari documented was real. Ieyasu was systematically building personal power at the Toyotomi house's expense. The Western coalition's fears were not paranoid. They were accurate. But being right about the diagnosis did not help when the treatment failed. Mitsunari knew what was coming. He chose to resist it anyway. Whether that makes him heroic or foolish depends on what you think loyalty is worth.
Japan has a cultural tradition of honoring those who fight losing causes with complete commitment. Yoshitsune, Saigo, Kusunoki Masashige. The roll call of noble failures is long and cherished. Mitsunari fits this tradition imperfectly because he was not a warrior hero. He was an accountant who chose to die for his employer's son. Japan has found that both more confusing and, quietly, more moving. The samurai ideals of the period were largely built around the martial. Mitsunari lived them through the administrative and died for them just as absolutely.
The tea story. The boy who served Hideyoshi 3 perfect cups has been told in Japan for 400 years. It survives because it captures something true about Mitsunari. He thought carefully about what the person before him needed and provided it without being asked. That quality made him an extraordinary administrator. It also made him inflexible when the person he was serving was dead, and the cause he was serving had already been lost before the battle began. He was the perfect servant to a man who no longer existed, fighting for a house that
that would fall regardless.
Ishida Mitsunari's head was displayed on a bridge in Kyoto after his execution, as was custom. Within a generation, his administrative records were being quietly consulted by Tokugawa officials, trying to understand how Hideyoshi's system had worked so well. Within a century, he was being written about with sympathy. Today, in Nagahama, in Shiga Prefecture, his home province, there is a festival in his honor each year. The bureaucrat who started a war and lost it has outlasted in popular memory most of the warriors who defeated him.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles, 2 generals, 60 years of rivalry, 5 battles that never produced a winner. Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin fought each other for decades, and neither could finish it. What does the most famous military rivalry in Japanese history tell us about what war is really for?
If Ishida Mitsunari's loyalty and the question of what it was worth stayed with you, subscribe for new episodes every week. Japan's greatest stories live in the space between winning and being right.